Welcome to a deep dive into the shocking origins of the Jeffrey Epstein case.
Ooh, this is going to be a good one.
Yeah, we're going way beyond the headlines today.
Way beyond.
Diving into an in-depth article you sent us from journalist Whitney Webb,
Right.
Hidden in Plain Sight, the shocking origins of the Jeffrey Epstein case. It connects Epstein to a long history of powerful figures in organized crime and how they might have used sexual blackmail for their own gain.
It's wild stuff.
Buckle up, because this is a wild ride through some unsettling historical twists and turns.
Yeah, this deep dive is going to be a real eye-opener because it's not just about one man.
Right.
We're talking about a potential system that Webb suggests has been operating for decades.
Wow.
As we go through this, we'll uncover possible connections to the mob, the FBI, and even the CIA.
Wow.
By the end, you'll see how these seemingly disparate entities might have intersected in a web of corruption and exploitation.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Webb's article starts by taking us all the way back to the Prohibition era, the 1920s. Now, I know this was a time of gangsters, bootleggers, and speakeasies, but sexual blackmail,
Right.
that's not something you usually associate with that era.
Right. It might seem like a surprise, but what's fascinating here is how figures like Samuel Bronfman and Louis Rosenstiel, two major players in the liquor industry, were deeply connected to organized crime. Specifically, the National Crime Syndicate.
Okay.
This was a nationwide alliance of predominantly Italian-American organized crime groups, kind of like a mafia supergroup.
Wow.
Bronfman, with his ties to the notorious mobster. Meyer Lansky shows us how blurry the lines between legitimate business and the mob really were back then.
So these guys were basically making fortunes off illegal booze and rubbing shoulders with some of the most dangerous criminals in the country.
Exactly.
But what about Rosenstiel?
Well,
He was the one throwing those infamous blackmail parties, correct?
Yeah.
The ones where powerful people were secretly recorded doing illegal things?
Exactly.
Wow.
Rosenstiel's parties were a key part of this whole operation.
Okay.
He'd invite government officials, mobsters, and influential figures to these lavish gatherings.
Oh, wow.
And then use any compromising information gathered there for blackmail.
It's just crazy.
This included recordings of sexual encounters, some of which allegedly involved underage individuals.
Wow.
This was a seriously dark side to the Roaring '20s that doesn't often make it into the history books.
It's mind-blowing to think that something this sinister could have been happening so openly.
I know.
It really makes you question what goes on behind closed doors even today.
Yeah.
But how did Meyer Lansky, who some consider the most successful mobster in American history, fit into all of this?
Lansky is a crucial link because he connects so many of the key players in this potential network of blackmail. He was close to both Bronfman and Rosenstiel, attending those lavish parties Rosenstiel would throw.
Wow.
But what makes Lansky particularly interesting is that he wasn't just a mob boss.
Right.
Webb's article suggests he may have also had connections to the U.S. government.
Really?
Which is a pretty chilling thought.
Wait, the U.S. government?
Yeah.
Are we talking about the infamous Operation Underworld here?
Yes.
That was during World War II, right?
That's right.
Where Lansky supposedly collaborated with naval intelligence?
Yes. Operation Underworld was a controversial program where the U.S. government essentially partnered with organized crime figures like Lansky to help protect American ports from sabotage.
Wow.
And according to Webb, this collaboration might have set a precedent for a deeper relationship between the government and organized crime that continued well into the Cold War.
Okay.
In fact, Lansky supposedly had ties to the CIA.
What?
Specifically to James J. Angleton, who was head of counterintelligence.
Oh, wow.
Webb's article even suggests these connections might have been used for covert activities, like attempts to assassinate Fidel Castro.
So we had this incredibly powerful mobster potentially pulling strings in the criminal underworld and government agencies at the same time.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
That's disturbing on so many levels.
Yeah.
What does this say about the people in power during that time?
What?
And how did J. Edgar Hoover, the seemingly incorruptible FBI director, fit into this picture?
Right.
He was known for being tough on organized crime.
That's where things take a really intriguing turn.
Okay.
Hoover, the man who built the FBI into the crime-fighting powerhouse it is today, had a surprisingly close relationship with Rosenstiel, the same man who was allegedly hosting these blackmail parties.
Oh, wow.
It seems completely at odds with Hoover's public image.
Wait a minute, are you saying that Hoover, the guy who is supposed to be taking down organized crime, was actually socializing with mobsters and potentially participating in these illegal activities?
It's a big question mark.
What could possibly explain that?
It's a huge contradiction that raises some serious questions.
Yeah.
According to Webb's research, Hoover was reportedly a guest at Rosensteel's parties.
Wow.
And there are even accounts suggesting that he himself may have been compromised by the mob through blackmail.
Blackmail on J. Edgar Hoover?
Uh-huh.
That's hard to believe. What could they possibly have on him?
Right.
The man was practically a saint in the public eye.
Well, there's a long-standing rumor about compromising photos of Hoover in drag that supposedly fell into the hands of the mob.
Wow.
This is unconfirmed, of course.
Okay.
But if true, these photos could explain why Hoover may have turned a blind eye to organized crime for so long, allowing it to grow in power and influence.
It's like something out of a spy thriller. A powerful law enforcement figure potentially compromised by the very criminals he's supposed to be fighting.
It's crazy.
This web of corruption is getting deeper by the minute.
Yeah.
But how does this all connect to Roy Cohn, the ruthless lawyer who famously mentored Donald Trump?
Roy Cohn is the bridge between organized crime and the corridors of power in Washington, D.C. He rose to prominence during the McCarthy era, working alongside Senator Joseph McCarthy during the Red Scare, and formed a close relationship with Hoover during that time.
Okay.
But as we'll discuss, Cohn was also deeply involved in Rosensteel's alleged sexual blackmail operation.
Wasn't this all happening at that infamous suite in the Plaza Hotel?
Yes.
Suite 233, I think it was?
That's right.
Where Cohn allegedly hosted parties involving underage individuals.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe that something so depraved could have been happening in such a public place.
That's right. Suite 233 at the Plaza Hotel was the alleged location for many of these gatherings.
Okay.
And it wasn't just rumor and speculation.
Yeah.
A former NYPD detective named James Rothstein claimed that Cohn himself admitted to using child prostitutes to blackmail people who were resisting the government's anti-communist agenda.
Hold on, so we're talking about a potential sexual blackmail operation with ties to the highest levels of government, with figures like Hoover and Cohn potentially pulling the strings.
It's heavy stuff.
This is starting to sound like a conspiracy theory,
Yeah.
but it's all backed up by evidence in Webb's article.
Right.
What are the implications of something like this?
What's particularly disturbing is that Cohn might not have been blackmailing people simply for personal gain. Webb suggests he may have been doing it to advance a specific political agenda. If true, it raises serious questions about how far these tactics were used during the Cold War and beyond.
It makes you wonder how many other powerful figures might have been caught up in this web of blackmail and corruption. We're starting to see a pattern emerge here, and it's not a pretty one.
No, it's not.
But how does this all connect to Jeffrey Epstein?
Right.
That's who we started this deep dive with.
Yeah.
And I'm still trying to figure out how he fits into this complex picture.
That's where we'll pick up next time.
Okay.
Because the connections between Cohn and Jeffrey Epstein are even more intriguing than what we've uncovered so far.
This is already more than I ever expected to learn about this whole affair. It's a lot to process.
Definitely.
But I can't wait to see where this goes next. Join us for part 2 of this deep dive, where we'll explore the links between Roy Cohn and Jeffrey Epstein and uncover even more shocking revelations about the true nature of this hidden network.
It's gonna be good.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the shocking origins of the Jeffrey Epstein case. If you're just joining us, we're following the threads laid out in Whitney Webb's article, Hidden in Plain Sight,
Right.
and uncovering a potential network of powerful figures in organized crime that might have used sexual blackmail for their own gain. Last time we left off with this unsettling connection between Roy Cohn's network and the people who would later surround Jeffrey Epstein. It seems like Cohn's death in 1986 didn't necessarily mean the end of this potential operation.
That's right. Webb's article points to a series of events in the early 1990s that hint at a continuation of these illicit activities, even after Cohn was out of the picture.
Okay.
One such event was a prostitution ring scandal that operated out of New York City. It was linked to a man named Robert Davidow.
The name Robert Davidow does sound familiar. He was a high-powered entertainment lawyer, wasn't he? Someone who represented big names in Hollywood?
Yes, he was a prominent figure in the entertainment industry, representing a number of A-list celebrities and media executives.
Oh.
The details of this particular case are pretty murky,
Okay.
but it involved accusations of procuring young women for some of his powerful clients. Does that sound familiar?
Absolutely. It's giving me some serious deja vu.
Yeah.
Are there any direct links between Davidoff and Cohn or Epstein?
Direct links are hard to come by in this world. Remember, these are people who operate in the shadows. But there are some intriguing whispers and connections that we can't ignore.
Okay.
One of the key figures in the Davidoff case was Heidi Fleiss.
Hold on, are we talking about Heidi Fleiss, the Hollywood madam, the one who ran that high-end prostitution ring in the 90s?
The very same. And guess who was one of her clients? Roy Cohn. It's a small detail, but it suggests there could be an overlap between these circles, a continuation of the patterns we've been discussing.
So we have Davidoff potentially carrying on some aspect of Cohn's alleged operation in New York, with possible ties to Heidi Fleiss, who also had Cohn as a client. It's a tangled web for sure, but the connections are starting to become clearer. The question is, how does Jeffrey Epstein fit into all of this?
This is where the trail gets even more intriguing. Epstein, like Cohn, was a master networker.
Okay.
He had this uncanny ability to cultivate relationships with extremely powerful people from all walks of life.
Right.
Finance, politics, academia, you name it. He even had connections to royalty.
His little black book is practically a who's who of the global elite. It's full of names that would make anyone's jaw drop. But was he just a brilliant social climber, or was there something more sinister going on beneath the surface?
Here's something to consider. The source of Epstein's immense wealth was always shrouded in mystery. He clearly had a knack for making money, but how he actually acquired his fortune was never fully explained. Some speculate, and Webb hints at this in her article, that he may have been involved in blackmail using compromising information to enrich himself and gain leverage over his powerful associates.
That's a chilling thought. But what kind of information could he have possibly had that would be valuable enough to amass that kind of fortune and influence? What could make these incredibly powerful people so vulnerable?
Think about the kinds of people Epstein surrounded himself with. We're talking about billionaires, politicians, celebrities. These are people who have reputations to protect secrets. They don't want the world to know. Information in the right hands is a powerful currency.
So those parties, Epstein was famous for throwing those gatherings on his private island. Were those more than just lavish social events for the rich and famous?
Right.
Were they actually opportunities to gather compromising material for blackmail?
That's a question investigators have been trying to answer for years. There was evidence suggesting that Epstein may have recorded many of his guests, potentially capturing them in compromising situations.
It almost sounds like a modern-day version of Rosensteel's blackmail parties, but on a much grander, more sophisticated scale.
Exactly.
But if Epstein was involved in blackmail, who was he working for? Was he a lone wolf, or was there a larger organization behind him?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Some theories suggest that Epstein may have had ties to intelligence agencies. It's possible that he was using this alleged blackmail operation to gather information for them, or to influence events in a way that benefited their interests.
We've already established that Cohn had potential connections to intelligence agencies. Could Epstein have somehow inherited those connections and continued the operation in a new era?
It's certainly a theory that can't be dismissed. One thing that's always fueled this speculation is Epstein's ability to travel so freely despite his criminal record.
Right.
That and his close association with figures like Ghislaine Maxwell, whose father was a media mogul with alleged intelligence ties, raises some eyebrows.
Yeah.
It all seems a little too convenient, a little too well connected for it to be mere coincidence.
It all points to a truly disturbing possibility. What if Epstein wasn't just a wealthy pedophile? What if he was actually a key player in a larger network of power and corruption? A network that's been operating in the shadows for decades. A network that uses sexual blackmail as a tool to achieve its aims.
And the scariest part is we may never know the full extent of Epstein's alleged operation or the true reach of this potential network. There's still so many unanswered questions, so many loose ends. It's a story that's far from over, even though Epstein himself is gone.
It's a chilling reminder that the things we see in the headlines often just scratch the surface. There's a whole world of hidden agendas, power plays, and dark secrets that most of us will never be privy to. It makes you wonder how much of what we see is real and how much is carefully constructed to keep us in the dark.
It also makes you wonder if this system, as Webb describes it, has been operating for so long. How can we possibly dismantle it? Who can we trust when those in positions of power are potentially compromised? Where do we even begin to unravel something this deeply entrenched?
It's a sobering thought. We've come a long way in this deep dive, uncovering a web of connections that spans decades and implicates some of the most powerful figures in the world. But we're not done yet. Join us for the final part of this episode, where we'll explore what we can learn from the Epstein case and how we can protect ourselves from these potential systems of exploitation. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the unsettling origins of the Jeffrey Epstein case. This journey has taken us from the dark heart of Prohibition-era crime syndicates all the way to the shadowy world of intelligence operations and alleged sexual blackmail.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
It's a lot to wrap our heads around.
It certainly challenges our assumptions about power, justice, and accountability.
Right.
And it's tempting to dismiss it all as a conspiracy theory.
Right.
But when you look at the evidence that Webb has laid out, it paints a very disturbing picture of a potential system operating outside the reach of the law.
So where do we go from here?
What
can we learn from the Epstein case and the network he was potentially a part of? What can we do with this information?
One of the most important takeaways is the need to be aware of how power can be abused. We tend to think of criminals as coming from the margins of society.
Right.
But the Epstein case, if these allegations are true, shows us that the most dangerous predators could be hiding in plain sight, using their wealth and influence to exploit others.
It's like that old saying, absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yeah.
But how can we guard against that corruption when it's happening at the highest levels of society? It feels like a system designed to protect the powerful.
You're right, it can feel that way. We need to develop a healthy skepticism towards those in positions of authority. We can't just blindly trust that people with power will always use it responsibly.
Right.
We have to be willing to question their motives, scrutinize their actions, and hold them accountable when they abuse their power.
That makes sense in theory, but questioning authority can be dangerous, especially when you're going up against powerful individuals with a lot to lose. Look at what happened to some of the journalists and whistleblowers who tried to expose Epstein's crimes. They were silenced, discredited, or even threatened.
That's precisely why it's so crucial to support independent journalism and investigative reporting.
Right.
These are the people who are willing to dig deep, to ask the uncomfortable questions, and shine a light into the dark corners of society. We need to protect them and make sure they have the resources to do their work.
It's also up to each of us as individuals to be vigilant. We need to pay attention to the world around us, be aware of the signs of exploitation, and speak up when we see something wrong. If something feels off, it probably is.
Silence is the greatest weapon of those who abuse power. By breaking the silence, by speaking out against injustice, we make it much harder for these systems of exploitation to thrive.
We've seen in this deep dive how interconnected these systems can be. Organized crime, intelligence agencies, powerful politicians, they're all potentially part of a larger network of power and influence that stretches beyond national borders.
Which means our efforts to combat these systems need to be interconnected as well. International cooperation, stronger laws, and greater transparency. These are all essential if we want to hold the powerful accountable, regardless of their wealth or status.
It's a daunting task, but not an impossible one. The Epstein case has shown us the power of collective action. It was the courage of the survivors who came forward, the persistence of investigative journalists, and the public outcry that finally brought Epstein to justice.
And even though Epstein himself is gone, the systems that may have enabled him are still out there. It's up to us to work towards dismantling these systems, to create a world where power is used responsibly and where vulnerable people are protected from exploitation.
This deep dive has been a real journey into the dark underbelly of power and privilege, a world where the rules seem to be different for the elite.
Yeah.
It's a world we need to understand if we ever hope to change it. I think this is a good place to wrap things up today.
I agree.
So much to think about.
But thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive and helping us unpack this incredibly complex and frankly disturbing story. It's clear that the Epstein case is just the tip of the iceberg, and there's still so much more to uncover. We encourage everyone to continue researching and asking questions and to never stop demanding accountability from those in power. Thanks again for listening.